Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon to all our two panelists and our online speaker, whom I will introduce later, and I would like to welcome also all the online viewers. Today's event is organized by two partners. One is Riga Technical University European Innovation Technology Food Hub and Climate Geek, and Pasaules Dabas Fonds, which is an associate partner of one of the world's biggest conservation organizations, WWF. Today's subject is environment and migration. What's the connection? Our online viewers can ask us questions through web platform menti.com, and the code I will say 8407610. 8407610. Let me introduce also today's speakers, and I will start with Agnes Lāce. She is a researcher at, I must say, Policy Study Center Providus, dealing with the migration. On the right from me is Valery Skribans, who is RTU, Riga Technical University research lead researcher, associate professor, and his subject is modeling and simulation, and he has so far also simulated our migration forecast model for Latvia. Our keynote speaker, and I hope you see on the screen, is joining us from Vilnius or Kaunas? What is it?
Hello, Vilnius.
Vilnius. Karolis Žibas is a regional officer for UN High Commission for Refugees for, I'm making shorter, Northern Europe for UNHCR. He will be our keynote speaker, and I will give a floor right now to him for a 10-minute sort of introduction about the subject. I would like to welcome you all again. Send in the questions, but probably it's too early right now as interactions for after our speakers to this menti.com. So, Carol is very welcome to join our meeting, and we are very happy and appreciate you could spare your time to go ahead and shoot.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect, thanks. So, thank you very much. And on behalf of UN Refugee Agency, I would like to thank you for having us today here. My intervention will be actually mainly focused on a couple of, I would say, very important issues. So, first of all, maybe briefly, I will tell about the newest global trends of voluntary as well as forced migration. And then maybe I will go briefly to the nexus between displacement and climate change, which is, I think, the core, I would say, issue for our today's discussion. And then I will dive into the issues, maybe to the solidarity and sustainable development agenda, which is, I think, we could reflect afterwards in our general discussion in a Q&A session. So for the very beginning, let's look at the numbers. As far as voluntary migration is concerned, I would say that the global population is still not mobile, because we have around 270 million people which are considered to be international migrants, which means that it's only 3.5 of global population is moving and is mobile international. Which means that 95% are still residing in the countries in which they were born. So the international migration extent, it's still not as high as one could think. However, the estimated numbers and proportion of international migrants already now goes beyond projections made for the year 2050, which means that in the projections that we had around 2.6% of global population moving for 230 million, which is now 270 million. So basically, we also see that the scale and the pace of international migration is very difficult to predict, because it's actually closely related to various internal and external factors: instability, economical crisis, conflicts, I would say demographical change, technology, transportation, and what is actually very relevant for nowadays, basically Corona or COVID-19, which is also kind of shaping the given or creating the obstacles of mobilities international, regionally, and globally. But also we have to understand that, when we say migration, different regions and different countries, they really understand this concept and definition of migration really differently. And I will just give you one example of internal migration I'm very sorry. Yeah, excuse me. I will just give you one very simple example of internal China migration. Where we have around 270 million people within China moving from one province to another province, which means that, Chinese internal migration is as big and as intense as, global migration on our Earth. So that is also very important. Another issue which is very important is for sure that, for example, if voluntary migration there is no any concentration in terms of voluntary migration, which means that there are many ways and many migration systems which are basically creates kind of the balance on the global scale. While actually, if you look at the forced migration, then most probably you will see that there is a bit higher concentration in the one or the other region, and I think this is also very important. Moving now from voluntary to forced migration or forced displacement, I would say that the picture is not very promising. At this stage, we have approximately 79.5 million forcibly displaced people, which means that it's around 1% of world's population is displaced, which means further, if you want to say so, that 1 from 97 people on Earth has been forced to leave their homes, which is actually quite a lot. So that's maybe one very important feature. Another important feature is that 3 in 4 refugees are in the countries bordering their homelands, when we talk about forced displacement, which means that around 73% of refugees are hosted by the countries neighboring their countries of origin. And only 17% of the world's refugees are hosted in so-called high-income countries. Looking in 2018, I would say, and actually I just wanted to put it in Latvian context, only in 2018, every single day, we had at least 37,000 forcibly displaced people, which in Latvian context would be a bit more than a population of Ventspils, if you can imagine. So basically every day you have population of Ventspils, which is displaced, and that population is in the urgent need of food, of shelter, of employment, of education, of healthcare professionals, services, and etc. So that is also kind of a very important trend. And now moving a bit from very purely technically speaking numbers to a bit of solidarity, we really see that at this stage, more than 95% of settled needs are unmet. So if we'll calculate that in 2020, UNHCR estimates that 1.4 million refugees are in need of resettlement because they cannot receive adequate protection in the current host countries. However, only 108,000 refugees were resettled in 2019 and only in 26 countries. So basically, we have the forced displacement is as high as never before in human history, and the solidarity is really not as high as we can expect. And that's also very important. Going more to the vulnerable groups, I would say that it's also very important to talk about the refugee children, because now around 40% of world's forcibly displaced are children. And if you look at such displacement crises as Afghanistan, Democratic Republic of Congo, and Burkina Faso, you will see that children constitute up to 60% of displaced population, which is really, really challenging for all of us. And going actually beyond that, today UNHCR published a report on refugee education, and I would say that the numbers are striking. For example, 48% of schools age refugees, they don't go to school. 77% of refugees go to primary school, and 31% of refugees youth go to high school, and only 3% of young refugees, they have access to higher education, which is also out of the challenging. Now, going from purely displacement to displacement and climate change or environmental situation. So there are some projections. So maybe first of all, I will just say that it's quite difficult to estimate. But today, approximately 1/3 of all forcibly displaced people were forced to move due to extreme weather conditions, while the remaining 2/3 are the results of other humanitarian crises and armed conflicts. And when I told you that it's quite difficult to forecast and foresee what kind of migration movements and dynamics will be in the next future, with the climate change, maybe it is a bit easier. And the World Bank estimates that at least in the 3 regions, which are Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Southeast Asia, only those 3 regions will generate around 120 million more climate migrants by 2050. Yeah, so basically, if now we are talking about 80 million of forcibly displaced people in 2050, it can be added around 120 million, which is quite a lot. And World Bank projects that it could be 3 scenarios. As always, one is very optimistic, or it is called more climate-friendly scenario. And within this scenario, we could have around a bit more than 50 million of displaced people. Then there is a medium-range scenario, which is called more inclusive development, which means that in this scenario, we could have more or less the same number of displaced people as we have now. It will be a bit more than 80 to 83 million. And the pessimistic scenario is 120 million. Yeah, so basically we have those 3 issues. So basically, we know that climate change is directly linked to let's say movements of migrants, but not only that. And I think I will go to that very, very soon. What is also very important to realize and actually to focus is that both climate change and forced displacement, they can be source of tensions and conflicts. For example, if there is added competition for natural resources, land rights, food and water, and such issues can worsen relationships between refugees and their non-refugee neighbors. And actually what is really important additionally is that if unstable climate collides with inequalities, if it collides with the weak governance, with the social and economical fragility, and with the sharp demographical changes, these consequences might lead to increased so-called mixed internal, regional, and international movements, or mixed migration flows, which means that interplay between climate change, conflicts, poverty, global regional inequalities, and persecution greatly increases the complexity of refugee emergencies in the next future. And I think this is something that we should address, not only talking about solidarity and physical movement of people, but also about our well-known sustainable development agenda and the we're very well-known argument, nobody should be left behind. So I think this is also very important. Now going a bit towards the legal framework, which is for sure also challenging, is that we all know the definition of refugee, which is embedded in the 1951 Convention. While the term of climate refugee is often used and can cause confusion, as the definition doesn't actually exist in international law. However, where the effects of climate change or disaster are linked to the situation of armed conflicts and violence, then these forcibly displaced people would in many cases fall within the definition of a refugee of 1951 Convention. While in other cases, these people would be recognized under international human rights law, in the guiding principles of international displacement and regional conventions such as Kampala conventions, So by looking at, let's say, the nexus between migration and climate change and environmental situation, we should also understand that solidarity is something which is really important. And I think today maybe we'll have a chance to also talk about the economical impact. But what I would also like to emphasize is that inequalities and perceptions toward the climate change and how to address the climate change is also linked to the inequalities and economical situation of the regions and the countries. And just one example for you that those countries which are suffering from the climate change and sort of producing quite of the significant amount of climate migrants, they usually produces least CO2 emissions. So that is also very important to look at most probably broader picture. And maybe for the last words, I would say that yes, we have millions, we have hundreds of thousands, but I think it's also very important to talk about our Baltic region or the Baltic states, where our refugee population it's still small. If we will, I think we even cannot compare with the regional flows where we have millions of refugees staying in Lebanon, in Turkey, in Jordan, while in Estonia we have a bit more than 300 of refugee population. In Lithuania we have approximately 1,800 of refugees, while in Latvia formally and officially we have 670 refugees. However, we know that in Latvia, we have quite significant secondary movement of people moving the country after relocation. So the actual and the real number could be smaller than that formal one, which is 670. So nevertheless, I think the solidarity is not just about, it's not about just resettlement. I think it's also about creating the inclusive societies and creating holistic integration policies, which could actually create welcoming communities at the grassroots level. And I think this is something that could be also discussed as a part of the solidarity framework. And for the last words, I would say that the solidarity also means that all of us as a community, as a grassroots movements and as a societies, we should change our habits towards more sustainable society. And I would say that towards more environmentally friendly society. And that could actually create additional solidarity element to our global and regional challenges nowadays. So that's it from my side, and I'm looking forward for the contribution from my colleagues and Q&A session.
Thank you,
so thanks a lot.
Karolis. Stay online. Thank you for this, so to say, baseline introduction on both on the global scale of whatever geographical and political dimension. You also mentioned a little bit about the legal status. And you mentioned that this is still quite difficult to forecast what's going on. Therefore, my next question goes to the scientist, Valeris. How do you deal with, from the modeling and simulation perspective, when you have several uncertainties? It's both environmental or climate uncertainty, and then you have a social uncertainty of the public. Of course, there are many other social economic aspects. And how do you address these issues from the scientific perspective? But I hope you can explain as in a language where also policymakers could understand. And so give us your reflections on this.
Let me introduce one research which directly related with this problem. Approximately 50 years ago, American scientist Jay Forrest developed several models with name World Industrial Dynamic, and the published paper Limits to Grow. In this publication, this publication was grown with financial support from Rome Club. It's a union of biggest families in the world. And the problem was, what will be world development in next 50 years? And one of the problem which was underlined in this research was shown that the world have very big ecological problems. It's not only climate change, but problems was related with human technological activities. It's first problem that humans change climate. It was one conclusion. Next conclusion was that land cannot produce a lot of food. It's limit. It have several limits. So population have several limits to grow. Now we can see that population grow not stopped from these years. This research it's very old, but each 10 years, each 10 years, the sciences groups repeat this research and try understand what how situation was changed in the world. And now we can see if we compare our situation 50 years ago, we can conclude the situation is significantly changed. First of all, we increase consumption effectivity. What does it mean? We have land lamps which use 10 years less electricity than lamps several years ago. So it means that 10 times less is pollution for production of electricity. It's first. It means that human influence on climate, we try to decrease it, but we cannot do it. We cannot do it in this time. We cannot do it in this time because we have very different countries. For example, you very well know that European Union to take part in climate regulation, but United States, for example, or China, they cannot to take part in this regulation. So production in Europe, it's environment friendly. I can tell for us. In China and in the United States, we cannot talk about this situation. Position of China is we have not technologies for environment friendly, and we have not environment friendly technologies. Position of United States, we produce if it's friendly for us. It's friendly for us. So it's one of approaches that people change, try to change the situation. We change climate. We try to save our climate, and it's not only weather conditions, but technological influence, people technological influence. And next problem is related that people we not only save our environment, but also we get more effective production of foods. So what it means that, for example, from several years, 50 years ago, we from 1 square meter of land we produce 1 kilogram of foods. Now we have new technologies. We produce 3 times more. It's related with technology grow in modification of natural products and so on. Based on it, we compare situation now and situation 50 years ago. It's not 50 years ago, forecast was missed because they cannot predict how fast we develop our technologies. And now in the world, in scientific world, we have 9 published development scenario, and developed scenarios is very different. One easy, I told easy about this scenarios is about two of them. One of them is what wrong if we do not nothing, as for example in Africa or in China. This situation, pollution in the several areas increase, and this area not will be useful for living, and migration increase. And it will be very bad problem, not only in regional or local level, and these problems will be very typical for all world. And other end of scenarios, you told about sensitivity development. This term also is related, based on forester jobs. And 50 years ago, she find the situation how it's possible to ensure in sustainable development on the road. And in this situation, we must increase efficiency of consumption, energy consumption, and we must increase in efficiency and in production, and we must limit population. We must limit population, because migration not related only with area or with climate, it's also related with humans. Because if in one region we have unlimited growth of population, but in another we have not population at all, it's nature of people go from one place to another place. So we try on the successful last 50 years, scientists and several countries try scientifically develop their countries and the world fully.
Thanks, Valerie. I have a gut feeling that we are here for a tremendous task of both saving planet and saving civilization. So it's yin-yang stuff, and therefore I have also one small provocative question for you. How much certainty we have about what we know about future? How much, as a modeling expert and simulation expert, how much certainty, looking on the backwards work, the kind of foresight, do we know future? How much we know about it, or how quickly we learn about the future? Or because our actions should be based what is going to happen in future, not what's happening only in the past. Yes. So just very quick, if you can have before we move forward.
Yes, answer is very, very easy. If you forecast or predict some situation, you try avoid results. Try avoid negative results. And if we together do all for only positive results, we have our time not limited. It's we call it sustainability development.
Thanks. I remember the BBC series Faulty Towers, and this was this Manuel. He said, I know nothing. So before we move forward, I want to remind our viewers, online viewers, that you can address us with questions on menti.com with the whatever its ID, or entering code 8407610. Please don't hesitate to ask questions, even anonymously. Probably if they will be good, we will try to answer. So now we go to Agnes with a kind of expertise also with the local, regional and European. And could you a little bit elaborate on European, East European, Baltic issues? What are the current agenda, what we are going to do, what exactly you are doing related to the migration? Because it is very divisive concept. For some people it's a solution, for some people it's a threat. And so it is also a dividing issue. It's a very hot issue also on some agendas politically.
So I guess I'll start with what I'm trying to do, and that also will contextualize the region. Of course, I don't know if this is because we have tried to limit population growth, but we know that in Latvia and also in the region, we do need workers. And there is in migration also to Latvia, of course, also out migration, and our diaspora is quite large. But what we are trying to do is to look at the evidence both from other countries and from our own experience to create a smart migration policy, immigration policy, a smart integration policy that looks at the various migrant groups that are there in Latvia, and also we're trying to achieve a smart return migration policy. But unfortunately, Latvia, alongside some other Eastern European countries, has shown the poorest results in terms of migrant integration policies and also refugee integration policies. So whenever we try to talk about the prospects of migration, climate migration wouldn't normally be the topic that we address. It's mostly labor migration, but of course it is all interconnected. There are even some environmental migration researchers who invite us to avoid the term climate refugees and so on, because it takes away from all the other factors that that encourage the movement of people. Inequality, whatever Carlos already mentioned, lack of development, or actually more development. That research also shows that the more a country develops, the less traditional means of production are, and agriculture goes away and so on. People actually lack jobs, they move to cities, there's no work for them in the cities, they're polluted, and then they move further. So actually it's a concoction of factors, and some of these migration movements also reach our region even though we don't think about it that way. An example is the Syrian refugees. That this is already a proven fact that the conflict in Syria was in part fueled by an extensive drought in the country and tensions because of scarce resources, another issue that Carlos already mentioned. Whenever we think about the connection between migration and climate change or the environment, we have to think about the capacity of all the countries to manage this, both of the countries of origin where these migrants come from, and then we can expect that some of the least developed countries will most likely be the bigger sending countries, because even though they don't contribute to climate change as extensively as some of the more industrially developed countries, they don't have the governance resources to actually manage these changes, to manage internal migration, to redirect their economic forecasts and create new jobs and so on. We also will have to think about what will be the legal framework for this type of migration. Do we just look at them as labor migrants and, as they move away from their country because there are no more jobs, do we make them go through regular labor immigration norms? Or is there a special regulation? If there is, then who qualifies for it and who measures it? Because essentially then we can probably call a lot of migration climate migration or environmental migration, but if everyone falls in this box, then nobody actually benefits from a special regulation regarding this.
Latvia is not only a kind of geographical unit, it's also a political unit, part of European Union. What's your take on that? What should we have as a country or any other East European country or Baltic country in the EU processes? We are less affected by the current migration, whatever the reasons are. And as an environmentalist, I fully share this Syrian example, but there are also extreme weather event migrations. There might be resource scarcity. There is even the ships migrate to fish in the seas where are exactly. More fish or less fish, or resource scarcity is always a kind of cause for the many conflicts, even the most bloodiest or whatever, oil and so on. So what's your take, how we can address this and how to come to the common understanding of the real multifaceted causes of the migration? It's not just only for the better life, which is a general umbrella stuff.
Exactly. So there are already 2 existing instruments that could be used, but that some European countries have opted out of the UN Global Compact on Safe, Orderly and Regular Migration, which was the first attempt to create kind of a worldwide migration policy document, or more like guidelines that also directly addressed climate issues. But as I said, Latvia opted out, also Austria and Italy and some other European countries opted out of this, even though the current EU Commission, current European Commission will use some of the main strains of this compact to set up their new plan for migration. Another already existing instrument, and Karolis can certainly talk more about this, are the Sustainable Development Goals. And the Development Goal on Climate Action actually outlines several targets that could be addressed to also talk about climate migration. So we, of course, have to increase our resilience towards extreme climate events and so on. Also, as a country with a very large coastline, we have to think about how this might change population along our coasts. And of course, in the EU, there are several countries that will be a lot more affected by this than we will be. Another thing is climate change should actually be looked at as a horizontal aspect that is included in policy planning documents. So if we do have a migration policy document on the national level or the regional level, this aspect should certainly come about. Not only talk about labor immigration to the IT sector, the blooming IT sector in Latvia, but also look at how this might or might not affect it. And also include this aspect in the awareness-raising activities when we talk about migration. But to the last one, I would invite people to be cautious, because this is often used by those against migration as something that just increases fear mongering and border wall building, because climate change is, of course, by many realized as something inevitable. You know, we're not even talking about the extent of it, but as a process that is going on. And if, you know, we talk about migration as something that is pushed further by climate change, then this will probably not change. And what should we do? There is the great scenario would be if we include this in our policy planning process, but the other, and we've seen European countries do this, we've seen the US do this, just build a wall and say we will not accommodate any of this. The European Union has been quite fragmented in terms of response to migration. Legal migration is no problem to anyone. We need workers, we need high-skilled workers, we have special programs for this. But what concerns asylum, of course, has been an issue, and the Dublin regulation is still being refurbished. The Dublin regulation is why refugees who arrive in Greece or in Italy, they have to stay there and apply for asylum there. They can't go further, in short. This is why there is the congestion. Or if, you know, people would start arriving across our borders, they would have to claim asylum here. They can't choose which European country it will be. And there is still no mechanism for kind of redistribution or rerouting of people to places that are better equipped to accommodate them, or just have more resources at hand and are not overwhelmed at the moment. The new Commission has set this forward as a goal, that they want to develop this, and there are some preliminary plans, but actually the environmental aspect has not been reflected there at all. It's currently only about the negotiation between countries who deserves to take them in more.
Thank you. I have now a surprise question for Karolis. Listen carefully. As an environmental organization representative, we closely refer to Sustainable Development Goals. And last year, when the World Economic Forum took place in Davos, the business leaders of the world agreed that the biggest threat is, the 5 biggest risks are climate crisis, biodiversity loss. One was man-made disasters, extreme weather events. I don't remember what else. So Europe wants to play a lead role in the global environmental discussion. It has come up with a Green Deal, a biodiversity strategy, circular economy, climate neutrality or zero carbon. Do you see or hope or whatever, any interaction that these green policies might and how they could interact with kind of smoothing out this migration issue? Sound off. We don't hear you.
Yes, yeah. I think that, I mean, you're right. And at the political agenda, we really have sustainable development, climate change, and biodiversity, as a really political priority. The question remains the same as, I would say, 10 years ago, or even 15 years ago, when we started with the Millennium Goals instead of Sustainable Development Agenda, because we remember that from 2000 to 2015 we had Millennium Goals, and then after 15 years we've seen that there was a very good result, that there was a really significant fight against the poverty, but then the global communities understood that still there is another challenge, which is called global and regional inequality. So we call it the very, very tremendous gap between rich and poor. And actually, if you'll go even to the European dimension, and if you'll go from the really high political level to the awareness around sustainable development, climate change, biodiversity, and etc., you will see that less sustainable, which means less equal societies, they actually have less solidarity, and they have less awareness towards these quite, I would say, sensitive issues, which means that even though the policymakers, the electoral campaigns, they are focusing on that, in this regard, the most important element is the human interaction, or actually the action coming from the human being. And if the societies are not aware, or if those societies are still unaware of what sustainable development and climate change means, then most probably any political strategy will be successful, because it has to be implemented in one or the other way on the ground and with a hands-on approach. So coming back to the research, I would say that it's not only about the nexus between sustainable and unsustainable societies towards climate change, but it's the same. You will see that the more society is sustainable, more equal, you will see that there is more solidarity towards welcoming refugees, migrants, and etc., and even more solidarity to create holistic, cohesive, and diverse society as a whole. So I think that we should first of all start with the awareness. What kind of awareness do we have in different countries? And I would say that awareness on the climate change and sustainable development in the Nordics is definitely not the same as awareness on those issues in the Baltic states. And and that is also the question about the resources. I think that also Agnieszka has emphasized, is that those countries which are really suffering from the deprivation, which are really suffering from the let's say mixed migration flows, most probably those countries will never focus on climate change and sustainable development. Those countries will focus on the very, very urgent needs, and that's basically on managing the emergency cases and emergency situations. Yeah. So in these cases, these issues are being deprioritized. So basically, even if if you look at different countries, you will see that the priorities are being set quite differently. So I would say that, again, I think I will come back to this. I would say for me, the Sustainable Development Agenda as a framework it's really the best one to explain really complex world and interconnectivity between different factors and actors, I would say. And at the end of the day here, when there are many, I would say, many people, many organizations, and even some of the electoral campaigns, they are focusing on migration and displacement as a problem or as a challenge. So basically, we have to come back to turn back to the Sustainable Development Agenda and its indicators, and you will see that migration is not a problem. Migration is just a consequence, the consequence of all the other problems, which are inequalities, climate change, conflicts, other issues which are also linked to dealing in guns and etc. So basically, this is, I think, first of all, we have to, if we want to change that and create solidarity, first of all, we have to shift our debate back towards sustainability and to tell that at the end of the day, that this is not a problem. And this is only a consequences of set of the problems that we have around. And by sticking only to our countries, or by just trying to kind of clean our backyard without looking at the international and global dimension, we will never sort out global challenges. And if we will not sort global challenges, we'll just be dealing with the consequences.
I have a saying that, or question, what is better, long and happy life or short and unhappy? And so it sometimes seems obvious answer, but it's not clear how to achieve this long one. I have to cut in with a question from the viewers, and it's very specific, and it's very general, but it's not specific to the climate. It's about refugees. And sorry, gentlemen, this question goes to Agnese. And the question from our viewers is, how do you promote migrant integration in a country like Latvia, where the society does not seem ready for large-scale migrant inflow? That's, of course, a general big issue, but what would be kind of key issues? And keep in mind that we talk also related to environment, if at all.
Yeah, so there are, of course, some traditional integration activities that Latvia offers to newcomers, that are language courses and integration courses. But what is what was very much shown in the context of refugees that arrived in Latvia is that this is the societal attitudes are extremely important, and about 80% of Latvian society are against welcoming refugees and also against welcoming immigrants from outside of the EU, 80%. So yes, the majority of the society is against this, and the refugees themselves have noticed this, and they face this attitude in looking for apartments, in looking for jobs, and in accessing services. So refugees in particular are in a very vulnerable position, but even those migrants who come here for work and are even high-skilled, they say that what they lack most is interaction with the host society. And we have not yet successfully created forums for socialization, for informal connection, and so on. But if we think about the inaccessibility of housing, and I'll try to connect this with the environment, what we see in terms of refugee housing is, first, they either live in apartments that are overcrowded, which means they push the efficiency of their living space because of the crowded environment. They also might live quite far away from the place they work, because finding work is also not easy, and commuting then also becomes an issue. And they have no time to devote to other activities when dealing with such basic needs and inaccessibilities. So we might, now in the new immigration law, we will probably have an obligation for engaging in early integration measures, such as language courses and integration courses, for all those arriving here from outside of the EU, also refugees. But we will see how this actually plays out in real life. The topic of recycling, or I don't know, what is the Four Seasons in Latvia, those are topics that are looked at in the integration courses, but certainly the environment issue isn't mainstreamed at all in the integration policies. I don't know, maybe Carlos has something to add to this. But I actually wanted to add to some of whatever Carlos already mentioned, and the interconnectedness of many dimensions, and looking at SDGs as the driving force. This integration policies, if they reflected the Sustainable Development Goals, then of course all of the topics that we talk about today would be more visible and more streamlined in all the integration activities.
Carolus, do you have anything to add?
Well, I think I could just, yes, I think that looking at our, I would say our region, which is North Europe, according to UN, is looking, I think that we have to, as far as integration is concerned, we have to start, first of all, with a very different model of integration. If you look at the Nordic countries, you will see that the integration system basically is funded by the state budget. It's implemented by the municipalities, where NGOs are just filling the gaps or complementing the local level integration efforts. In the Baltic states, we have a bit different situation where we have EU-funded integration system, which is being run by the NGOs, and municipalities are basically having one or the other, I would say, role, which is still not very clear. And I think this is very big differences, that in the Nordics you have really self-sustainable and very well-funded integration system, because that's the priority. And in the Baltics you have a bit of a fragmented integration system, where the integration services are basically fragmented around the city and around the country. And it's project-based, which means that it's not very sustainable all the time at space, which further means that sometimes refugees and migrants are being left without any integration services. So I think that's the very essence of the very different model. And then when we're talking about language courses, housing, other issues, these are only the consequences of not having very sustainable approach towards holistic integration policy making. So I think that's an issue. However, I would like to emphasize not only challenges but opportunities, because if you look at 2015 and 16, where we had a very intense debate on, you know, whether the countries from the Baltic states should join relocation and resettlement or not, and actually all the Baltic states, they joined. And at that time, many countries, including Lithuania and Latvia, they already started to develop a new approach towards integration system by creating the targeted action plans, by, you know, creating a bit of new know-how. And at the end of the day, what we experienced is that in 2015 and 16, we experienced the rise of the new voluntary movement and grassroots level engagement to help refugees. And actually we have the same in Latvia. So I think that there are challenges, but also there is an opportunity where people started to look at this issue more precisely, and at least started to understand that, you know, what is the difference between forced migration and voluntary migration, what is the difference between migrant work and refugee, and etc. So I think that for sure there are many challenges, but at the same time there are opportunities. And I would say that by consolidating all those efforts from the grassroots level and already received know-how, I think we could create actually decent response to integration if it would be a priority at a political level.
Thank you. Now I have a surprise question for all you three. You will have time for others to prepare or think about the answer while the others are speaking. From the one side, we have vertical division. We have national states. We have regional dimension of the whatever environment and migration. You have EU level, and then you have global level. But then we have also division in sustainable development goals. We have, again, environmental goals, we have social goals, well-being goals, and whatever, migration as such. My question is, are our governance structures at different levels prepared to tackle with this multifaceted policy challenge, which has never been around, because environment challenges were not around before the whole of the ozone and things like that. And we haven't had sustainable development or millennium goals, as Karolis taught. So think about, should something be done, or do we have a chance to do something better and different to integrate both vertically and horizontally? And of course, we know that the UN system is it's not so fast in solving global problems, and it was established when even China was not around the Security Council, and what environment and climate crisis and also migration is, for some countries, has become a huge security threat. You know, and so how much we are prepared and what should we do? You as a scientist, Karolis as, let's say, UN representative, the global organizations representative, or the kind of global non-partisan organization, and you as a political analyst, so we don't have here government representatives. And of course, maybe we can, our viewers and us as such, we can take something from this discussion, some issues which pop up in this discussion. So who is willing to start?
I can start if it's okay for my colleagues.
So the others have time.
Yeah, I mean, it's once again, I'm a UN official, and I think I will again come back to one of the most important agendas, which is the UN Sustainable Development Agenda. And actually, there is one very important SDG, or Sustainable Development Goal, which is number 17, which is actually called the Implementation of Sustainable Development Agenda, where you have the target 17.14, which is called Enhance PCD, or it means to enhance and facilitate policy coherence for development. Yeah, and that policy coherence for development actually tells you that sometimes less is more. Yeah? That sometimes less strategies are actually better, and like to have one coherent strategy is better than to have 10 strategies that are scattered around. And here I would just tell you a very simple example with the migration integration policy making and the mainstream. Yeah, when sometimes we have separate integration policies and strategies which are basically linked only to the one or the other target group. Let's say the strategy for refugee integration, then strategy for Roma inclusion, and et cetera, while the PCD, or policy coherence for development, is saying that actually by mainstreaming and putting all those important and sensitive issues within the one strategy and creating this coherence and synergy between various ministries, between various civil society actors, that what you call whole of the society approach. And that's how we actually can create this sense of belonging and commitment. So I think that looking much more deeper in this Sustainable Development Goal number 17, that could at least give you the general impression, how we could create or actually connect vertical and horizontal issues, challenges, and various mandates of actually our governments and the ministries which are responsible for the one or the other issue. Like, let's say, I would just give an example. In some of the countries, there is one ministry which is responsible for diaspora policy. The other ministry is responsible for migration policy, while the other for anti-trafficking policy. But sometimes we know that diasporas, they are really suffering from the trafficking in human beings. Yeah. So basically, we have also to connect various mandates and to connect, I would say, various challenges within the one coherent, strategy, and to find those synergies. So I would say that this is very much important, and that could be actually done. Another issue is for sure we have to come back to education, and it's not about now providing the trainings for the local level actors, for the civil society, and I don't know, for the parliamentarians. It's not about that. It's about coming back to the horizontal curriculum in the kindergarten, primary school, secondary school, universities, and trying to look at that curriculum, what's there. Do we have diversity? Do we have sustainable development there? Do we have this inclusive, integrated, and global learning and teaching approach where actually you could have mathematics, history, geography, physics, biology, all those issues where actually you could have all those migration, diversity, inclusion, sustainable development agenda as a horizontal measures, but not as a specific measures which are being taught only very specific subjects. Because what you can do actually, you can even teach the mathematics by putting behind the mathematics other issues as migration, displacement, people moving from North Africa to South Europe, etc. And that's what we call integrated and global learning and teaching process. So I think that is something which is in the longer run could create the outcome that we would never again have to deal with the consequences, but actually going back to the roots and trying to look at education from the early stages.
Thank you. Who is willing to go next? This is like compulsory, like.
Well, I think I'll build on whatever Karolis said. And we recently have gone through the development of our national development plan in Latvia. And of course, they also tried to link it with SDGs. But I think that many countries, this is not just Latvia, we think that we need to come up with something new. Even though the policy framework and the interconnectedness of many spheres has already been put on paper by someone. We don't have to come up with a new scheme. And whenever we cherry pick from, for example, a list of sustainable development goals and see, well, perhaps in the next 7 years in Latvia, we will only address half of them, not all of them, that this is what creates the challenges later, because they have already been developed in a way that show the interconnectedness and that allow us to react on certain processes whenever they happen. We certainly see this in migration policy, where we think that we can only choose one type of migration that will happen to Latvia and then disregard everything else. And then we will not have the policy instruments ready to react on this. What regards education, I think we have already seen the inclusion of these aspects in the new school curricula in Latvia after the reform with the competence-based education system. We'll see how that works, but global peace education certainly touches upon all of these topics. Whether our governments are ready for these policy challenges, this is another issue, because both climate and migration are topics that are very convenient for campaigning, for those are issues that are very different when we look at the ideological strains of political parties, especially in Latvia, where the public opinion towards migration is so strong and negative, where there are still conspiracy theories about whether climate change is real. This is an environment where these topics are especially easy to be used for political mobilization and for creating tensions in the society for their own political gain. So our governments might not be ready to address these issues to the extent that then limits their campaigning power, let's say. So this is why it has been so difficult to talk, more openly and comprehensively about migration or climate issues in our national development plan, because all of these topics are so sensitive for certain political powers that we avoid including them. But then we see the consequences of this later, of this cherry picking.
Valeris, what do scientists say about it?
Our Latvian political makers are in very hard situation. In reality, strategy of European Union, it's related to this development all European Union. But situation in Latvia is different. It is different from situation in Germany or in the United Kingdom. It's not secret that a lot of people go from Latvia to United Kingdom
it's not any longer in Europe.
no, to German. It's no reason. No reason. Medical specialists go to Sweden. They have special programs for our medical specialists. So, what is planning process? We have regulation from European Union. According with this regulation, we have our goals. These goals not all time related with our situation. It's at all why our policymakers are in very hard situation. And for us, we are small, and it's very hard to define our interest in all European Union. So, policy, it's about migration policy, but about climate change policy. This system works in European Union and in Latvia. Very well knows that European Union take regulation in for example, in electricity or in car used. After some years, we change our regulation, and also we have similar change in Latvia. So we have a little bit time. For example, when German set ban for diesel car in cities, these cars go to Latvia. But after then, our change increased tax for old cars. So I think our government will be a little bit faster, to improve situation.
With the authority as a facilitator, I like to share some of my crazy ideas. In one of the brainstormings we had globally on WWF kind of annual meeting, I came up with the idea that in our legal systems we don't have future generation ombudsman. So we always, from the legal perspective, policy perspective, we talk about kind of passing on certain values, but we don't have in legal systems that represented. We have human rights ombudsmen in many countries, and that is only one aspect with it's a human and environmental conflict where the both sides should be, or if it's not conflict, that's a kind of quotation, yeah, it's an issue. Another thing is that in very, very few cases, nature is a legal person. So to say, I think this is a way if we want to go ahead in the future from the legal perspective, not only policy perspective. All our legislation, all sustainability includes future generation is about, yeah. But there are no mechanisms behind. Even I'm very proud that new Latvian constitution or Satversme, which is called in Latvian, it's in the preamble, there is a nature and sustainability. So, but it has not have legal supporting legal basis. So this was, I stopped my interaction. Imagine only here in Baltics, we are only 100 years old, so to say, as states, as countries. And who could imagine that 150, then we had kind of half-century almost occupation, and no one could imagine we would be in EU. So I want to little bit have a kind of positive or whatever fortune telling for all three of you. What will be this area in 50 years? Both, whatever, nationally or as the Baltics, how will we live and what we have to solve? And this is not much time to contemplate. We are kind of approaching to the end because I want also from you all the closing remarks later. So just a little bit, either brainstorm or dream. Who is the biggest dreamer?
I certainly think that the European Union will still be around. I know there are people who disagree, but I am sure it will be around. I do really think that the Baltic states certainly have increased their governance capacities, and we are developing in a very good direction, with some hiccups on the way, but in general this is a good direction. And I think the European Union will only become stronger, and there will be less issues decided only on the national level, because those are currently the issues that create most lockdowns in the European Union, especially in terms of migration policy, which is there are many elements that are left to national competencies. So I think we will become, this cooperation in these issues will become closer, also because the nature of migration will change, and the European Union will have to see itself as a unified actor in our response to this. I also see the European Union as a more coherent actor in terms of development cooperation and development aid, addressing these issues that are currently linked with environmental migration, where we, instead of giving money to our neighboring countries and regions to fix the migration problem for us, I do think that this will be a region that will act to create jobs, not to just create infrastructure objects and give money to semi-corrupt governments or just corrupt governments. I do think that we will improve our capacity in this, and there's more and more research that will allow us to do this.
Apart from political dimensions, anything on sustainability?
Well, I would really hope that we embody the Sustainable Development Goals and think about all policy areas. And whenever, in Latvia, when there's a draft law or something, you have to include a little assessment of what will be the impact on national budget if this law is passed or whatever. I hope that with time there is a little box that says what is the impact on our on us addressing sustainable development goals. How does this align? And instead of just saying we are writing this because goal 17.14 says that and that, but that we actually assess how this aligns with our priorities.
Valerie, what you can promise to my non-existing grandchildren, how they will live?
I think they will living similar as now living in Sweden or in Finland. The situation is it's related with our development in future. Now we have very big problem faced. The population age grow up. So it's a very big problem. So, we have more and more people in the pension system, and we need young people who will work. He will work and will pay for grandfathers.
Well, maybe still I have a chance to be around if the population is around, kind of aging, and I could experience myself 50 years down the road.
No, not only for grandfather, but for all population. Yeah. For all population. So, German, Swedish, they solve the problem. They invite people from Africa, from China, and after I think after 25 years. Latvian society will be changed, and we will be similar as Swedish society. We invite people from another countries too. People not gone from Latvia, we invite.
Yeah, I can just remind that before the Second World War, Latvia was, at least Riga, was quite a multinational place to live, and for very, very different nationalities. If it's maybe nationality will not be important, I don't know. And
50 years ago, public opinion in Sweden towards migration was like it is today in Latvia. So we have time to change.
So, Karolis, What you can from UN promise me, how my kids will, grandchildren will live.
Well, I think that yeah, I cannot promise you so much, but if looking through the lens of like quite big optimism, I would say that I really do hope that we will be able to localize sustainable development agenda, not in a formal way, but in terms of like creating the awareness around local population and grassroots societies. I think that's really important, and that most probably can create a bit more solidarity towards various issues, including refugee resettlement and relocation. That's the first thing. Another thing, I really do hope that in 100 years, 150 years, we will be able to reduce such a big inequality. And it's not just about the global inequality between, I don't know, global South and global North, but it's also about regional inequality and also inequality within the country as Latvia or Lithuania. If you look at Gini index, it's also quite a big Gini index as well. So I think that as soon as we will reach this point by reducing inequalities, I think also we can manage until 2050 this very optimistic World Bank 2018 scenario with not more than 50 million of displaced people due to climate change. So that's why I'm trying to say that, there are interconnectivity between the awareness, your actions, reducing inequality, and then there's people moving because of the severe climate change. So I think that these three elements would actually be really, really important for all of us. And I think that at the end of the day, I would say that we should also have and still maintain our very strong memory of history, because many years ago, like 65, 70, 75 years ago, Latvians, Lithuanians, Ukrainians, Hungarians, they were more or less in the same position that today we have Syrians and Eritreans and Afghans. So most probably that we have the same problem and challenge with the displacement, but instead of Lithuanians and Latvians in Germany refugee camps, we have Syrians in camps of Jordan and in Greece and Italy and Turkey. So I think that I really do hope that after 50 and 60 and more years, we will really have a significantly smaller number of those people which have to force to flee their homes and their home countries.
Thanks. We are kind of approaching the closing of this discussion. Therefore, I would like to ask you, every one of you, to come up with some kind of closing remarks or thoughts. What you bring back from this discussion, anything new, or what you would say as a kind of future steps and what we have to take, mostly related to this climate migration issue, which is, I think, wrong term in general, and how we will better prepare. Let's start with Valeris.
Okay. I think each of us can save nature, so I offer for each to separate trash in different boxes. So it's very easy, but it's easy and it's possible for each one. It's very good way how to help to your parent, to your children, save our nature, and if we save our nature, people go to Latvia, and people don't go from Latvia.
Good. Agnes, what's your take? What do you take away, and what you leave as a kind of, probably not only for us as a kind of as a panel and Karolis, but also for our online viewers and the ones who will look afterwards? What's your kind of?
Yeah, the message is, well, first of all, migration will never stop. Climate change will also be there and will need adaptation. So there is really no room for discussing whether we need some kind of reaction to these processes. It's a fact. We do. Now, the question is, how do we formulate our goals? What are the reasons why we react in one way or another? And do we realize the consequences of these actions, of our policies? encouraging message, I guess, to policymakers would be to think certainly about the way this can benefit our country, how we can shape this to, foster our own growth, of course, in a sustainable and inclusive manner, but also how do we think about these policies as ways to establish our position, both in the EU and in the region that we are in, because we are still kind of a bridge region between the EU and our neighbors, and think about how we can maximize the gains for us, for people on the move, and for people who will not move but might still need assistance for adapting to new circumstances. And just as we have helped and promoted certain policies for transitioning to democracy in Georgia and Central Asia, we can also pave our own path to better solutions and then bring them abroad in line with, of course, the Green Deal set forward by the EU and Sustainable Development Goals that we have also agreed to adhere to.
Thanks. Karolis, you started this whole discussion at the beginning with a kind of, you set the ground. Now you have to a little bit wrap up and clean it, so to say, and come up with something very historical. Switch on, please, the sound again.
Well, that's always happens when you are, all day sitting for the webinars and online discussion. That is the thing. Well, I think that, by wrapping up, I think, it's very simple. Like, once again, to repeat, there is no one size fits all approach, and I think that, definitely we have to come up with the social innovations. Social innovations in this era is something which is really important. We cannot anymore go with a very traditional pathway, and we cannot just pretend that like SDGs, localizing SDGs. We do the thing, we just put the gadget of SDG on our, let's say, law, and we try to say that this is all an example of localization of SDG, which is not the case at all. So I think that in this regard, the social innovations in terms of integration, in terms of creating solidarity and diverse societies, that's one thing. Another thing, it's innovations of trying to create new humanitarian corridors. And I would say that the good practice coming from all around the globe, including Canada, on community-based sponsorship, on complementary pathways, where actually we can use labor migration as a complementary pathway for refugees to be able to come from one country to another country. That is also kind of the things that actually should start to be debated in also in the Baltic states, which means that, we are going from very traditional way of thinking about asylum system and asylum policies, and we're trying to engage non-traditional stakeholders, non-traditional funders. And I think that kind of also social innovation can also create the thing which is called learning by doing. And I think that learning by doing also can create much more cohesive society. And that actually is very much linked to the Eurobarometer and to, I think, research that Agnes was quoting, because usually if you will see that those countries where we have larger migrant communities, those countries tend to see much more positive outcome from migration. Those countries which has very insignificant or not even visible migrant refugee communities, those countries actually, they see the threat, the security threat in the migration process in general in itself. So I think that could be also very much, related to the solution. But one of the things that maybe I would also like to emphasize here is that, if you look at the forecasts of the majority of scientists and researchers which are looking at climate change, unfortunately, the majority of those people, they will say that it's already too late. So yes, most probably it is too late to come back and to recover, let's say, all the potential that our Earth had once. So at least we have to be as fast as possible and as innovative as possible, to kind of mitigate those risks, to, actually create that environment which actually could be really, really friendly and human for our next couple of generations. And I think that this is also very much linked not only to social and economical inequalities reducing, but also linked to the social innovation. So that is, I think, the most important element. And I think that also we should focus on what Agnes told, that as long as all these issues will be placed within the mandate of national policies, I think that it will be very, very, very difficult to have, let's say, the trade-off, and it will be very, very difficult to create this coexistence, because as soon as we start talking about migration, displacement, relocation, we really see that we are moving towards more emotional debate rather than evidence-based debate. So what I would really like to take away from this, and what I would really invite all of us to do, is to rely less on emotions and focus more on evidence while we talk about these all important and sensitive issues.
Thanks for the summary, and I think I can share my own thoughts. That funny enough, this COVID, the tragedy, has made possible to meet more strangers than in the real life. The online solutions and this kind of discussion we have here. When we had the live conversation in this LAMPA festival in CESIS already, how many years in the sequence, you pass the people and you don't talk to them, and you kind of cherry pick where you want to go or talk to your friends. And I think this kind of event, and thanks for organizers, I think provides opportunity to meet people with different backgrounds. You can, like from the Chinese restaurant menu, where there's plenty of food, plenty of choices. You can choose subjects you were never ever about. So I'm going to close this down with, of course, an announcement and saying a real thank you for those who were watching online, and most of all to our distinguished panel who devoted time. We had here Agnes Elatse, the Providus Research Center lead researcher. We had Associate Professor Valeris, I first met you, Skribans. Thank you very much for your kind of input about modeling the future. And of course, our missing in action or online, Karolis Ribas from Vilnius. This event was organized by Riga Technical University and European Innovation Technology Food Hub and Climate Kick, and Pasaules Dabas Fonds, who is an associate partner of WWF. And I remind the viewers that this was discussion about migration and climate. What's the connection? So, and just a little bit now, our organization has other. Tomorrow, please watch wine and environment. What's the connection? Another issue. So we have environment and economy, and there is plenty of many others. Go to LAMPA's homepage and look for what you can. Once again, thank you very much, and we hope we will solve this stuff. Yes. Whenever my grandchildren will be around, huh? Thank you very much.